Welcome back to Bitcoin Treasuries. I'm Tim Kotzman here with Brandon. Brandon, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tim. Looking forward to it.
Do you want to start with kind of how we met and all the details around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I run the local meetup here in Minneapolis, and I've been doing that since about 2019 and started very humbly. Now we have a great space and a good group and hundreds of members and tons of side groups. I'm really proud of it. And in November of 2024, we had Punter Jeff in town who was here for a work trip, and he gave a presentation at our meetup. And Tim, among many in the crowd, were the first time they had ever been to the meetup. And, as I'm kind of shaking hands after Punter Jeff's presentation, I learned that you flew in from New York, another guy from Philadelphia, someone drove 15 hours from Canada. And I opened up the room by just asking, hey, how many of you, is it your first time at the meetup? And surprisingly, between 25 and probably 35% of the room was their first time there, and well
Wow.
over 100 people in attendance. And I had never seen 25 plus percent new members at the meetup. And so when I was reflecting on that a little bit, it made me realize that the MicroStrategy community has plenty of overlap with Bitcoiners, of course, but it's not one to one.
Mhm.
And I think MicroStrategy is bringing in a whole new type of investor who's interested in the space. And I think that's fascinating. Obviously, good for Bitcoin. And yeah, I saw a bright orange tie right when I walked in the room, and Tim and I had a quick chat, and here we are.
Yeah, no, it was a great experience, great space, as you've said. And yeah, so definitely thank you for all your efforts there with hosting that. And do you want to dive into your background and how you got uh, on the path to Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like many people, it took multiple run-ins with this thing before it clicked. So, if you're ever thinking, hey, I thought about it way back when and didn't pull the trigger, well, you are not alone. I don't know a single Bitcoiner who bought it the first time they heard about it. So, just throw that pain away that, I could be retired right now, et cetera, et cetera. Just throw it all away. Even if you would have bought it when you first heard about it, you probably would have sold it like most people did. And so I'll save you my early run-ins. It was 2017. Friends were trading all the altcoins and making a bunch of money. And, again, third time or so running into it. And I finally clicked, okay, fine, I'm going to go trade these shitcoins too. And so all through 2017, traded all the coins I could get my hands on, made a bunch of money. 2018 came, market corrects, lost a bunch of money. Very quickly realized I was not a genius. I didn't have any edge. I didn't know what was going on here. And the first half of 2018, I decided to teach myself economics from the ground up, figure out what's really going on here. And, looking back, partially just to justify my own ignorance and the roller coaster ride I went on financially. And through that process, I uncovered that I align with this ethos of the thing at the bottom of this whole movement, and I align with that personally. And I think that it's some sort of a socio-political movement. It is a recognition that individuals should be sovereign over their own money, meaning the government doesn't have to issue the currency. They can do that, but it doesn't need to be that way. And so it's a mission of, in a way, financial populism, in a way, letting the little guy have a fair and equal playing field with the big guys in the financial system. And I very much like that mission. And so, yeah, through 2018, I was living in Asia at the time, going to meetups all over the place and studying, learning this thing. And about halfway through that year, I was at a meetup in Bali, and someone gave a presentation on the Lightning Network.
Mhm.
And I saw the architecture of all the early nodes and connections. And it looked like a mycelial network, which is the primary form that a fungus lives in, which we can talk about if we want. And right there, I was like, whoa, the parallel here with the natural world is astounding. I'm a amateur biologist, no formal training, just a nerd who likes this stuff. And so I started to see Bitcoin through the lens of a living organism. I went home that night, took my little moped back home in the pouring rain. I'll never forget it. And I'm just sitting at the kitchen table, scribbling and writing down all these ideas flooding into my head as I'm starting to figure out what Bitcoin is, but looking at it through a biological lens. And later that year, I published a paper exploring Bitcoin as a living organism. That's called Mycelium of Money. And that was sort of my first tiptoeing into the industry, let's say. And to be honest, I was intimidated to publish this essay because at the time, most people were talking about Bitcoin through a financial lens, through a software lens, through cryptography, various other camps like that. And I'm over here saying, are we sure Bitcoin's not a new form of digital organism? And so, to my surprise, Bitcoiners are extremely open-minded, as most people will already know on this, listening to this. And yeah, that kind of kicked off a career in Bitcoin land. I sold the business I was running and shifted full-time efforts into Bitcoin land. Did all kinds of odd jobs, write here, consult there, do some work over here, until I finally landed at Swan in December of 2019. So just past my 5-year anniversary at Swan, which just a Bitcoin brokerage. And yeah, that's how I got in the industry. And the rest is history. Wrote a bunch of essays since, and yeah, pretty much spend all my time on this thing.
That's interesting to hear you say that you were hesitant to put out the writings at first. Was there did you just use time as a tool where at a certain point you're like, I'm just going to put this out there? Or was there something else that led you to kind of taking that step? Because for those that are not familiar, I mean, you're known for your insights on Bitcoin and particularly its parallels to the natural systems and its role in society. And yeah, I'd love to jump into the parallels between Bitcoin and mycelium networks. How does that analogy help us understand Bitcoin's role in society? And we could roll from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was hesitant because I didn't see the market accepting it. A little bit of imposter syndrome, a little bit of I'm a noob here. I don't know how it's going to be. A little bit of my, at the time, intellectual heroes. Maybe that's overstating it, but the people I looked up to in the Bitcoin space, there's really just wasn't that much content around there. And yeah, honestly, no good excuse. And then Dan Held published a series of articles that year exploring the genesis of Bitcoin. So, how did Satoshi come up with this? What's up with the timing? And he was sort of trying to figure out what parts of the early story matter and which parts are just noise as a part of the history. And so Dan, and that was through the lens of gardening and tending to his garden. I don't remember all the analogies, but it was like a foot towards the writing I had done. And I got in touch with Dan, and he actually gave me the confidence to publish. He read through my early drafts. He gave me lots of good notes, kind of nudged me to get it out there, and he also helped me formulate it in a marketing sense. So how to pitch this thing, how to make sure the right people see it, and stuff like that. So a big shout out to Dan Held for that. And then it finally got out in like December of 2018. And I remember I was at a meetup in Minneapolis here, and my phone was just buzzing, buzzing, buzzing. I've never had something go viral before on Twitter. And yeah, my phone was just buzzing so much my battery died, and I had to go home and
That's
charge
when
my.
you know. That's when you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. Yeah, that's that. And then, maybe 2 years later, that full essay was completed. There's multiple parts exploring Bitcoin from all these different angles. But if you want, I can go through some of the thought process behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by OnRamp. Bitcoin custody is evolving. Both self custody and single third party custody come with significant risks and trade offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated, cold storage, multi sig vault, guarded by 3 independent institutional grade custodians, none of which have unilateral control. Multi institution custody removes the technical, mental, and physical burdens of private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. To learn more, schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team. Go to www.onrampbitcoin.com.
Okay, cool. So let's start with super high level here. So what is this Bitcoin thing? Well, it's at $2 trillion market cap right now, but it's not a company. It's not like other things. There's no CEO, there's no marketing agency, no one's officially in charge. We're all individually participating, we're coordinating this thing, and it just slurps up value like crazy, and it sort of feels like this autonomous process that's out of our control. And how do you define, where is the edge of where does Bitcoin start? Where does it end? Is it software? Is it the hardware that we run to mine the thing? Is it the social layer? Is it the exchanges? Is it everything all combined, right? It more feels like an ecosystem. There's not really a black and white boundary here. And again, I think it's not intelligent or it's not a living organism like we might define a human or your dog or something like that. I think it's actually a different type of intelligence. And I think the best example to explain that is the slime mold, which is not technically a fungus, but it formerly was classified as such, so I'll treat it as such here. The Japanese did a study with the slime mold where they took a map of the Tokyo subway system. Each of the subway stops, they dropped some oat flakes, which are the slime mold's favorite food. Okay, so think petri dish with a map. And then they release the slime mold in the petri dish, and within 24 hours, it grows to connect all the subway stops, and then it re-architects its entire body to form a network of consuming all this food and communicating in the most efficient manner. And then they analyze, okay, the slime mold versus the Japanese engineers, and they found out that the slime mold actually created a more efficient and more robust subway system than our best engineers. Okay, so what does this tell us? It's not that the Japanese engineers did a bad job. It's that it's an entirely separate type of intelligence. And this network-based intelligence of the slime mold actually outcompetes the central processing unit of the humans in this case. So what do I mean? Slime mold is more like a million or a billion little microorganisms working together in a colony. Okay, and the organisms on the edge of this network, they're making decisions in real time based on their local environment. So as a network, it pushes decision making to the edge where information is up to date and the individuals they're acting in their own best interest. The sum total of those interactions creates the organism, and it creates some sort of a network intelligence. And so some people may be familiar with the traveling salesman problem. It's essentially figuring out how to optimize a route between n number of stops. It's very computationally expensive for central processing units or brains or computers that we know today, but it's very easy for the slime mold and other network intelligences. Okay, so Bitcoin is more like the slime mold. Each individual actor, we're all making our own best decisions: when to buy, when to sell, when to write content on the internet defending our position, when to lobby for government, when to fix a bug, when to fork the network. All these things are an emergent process that the individual actors go through. And the sum total of those individual actors makes up the network, right? And so in some situations, you want a central processing unit. It's way more efficient, but it's not as robust. And in other situations, you do want to push decision making to the edge. Um, yeah, that's kind of the quick primer. Do you have any thoughts there? I can keep going on fungi forever, but yeah.
I think as far as you want to go there, and then you're talking about centralized. So if we think about decentralized systems, how does Bitcoin mimic decentralized systems in nature? If there's other examples, and what lessons can we learn from these comparisons?
Definitely. Yeah, let me do a 30 seconds on fungi 101. That'll help orient us here. So, if you look in biology, there's different kingdoms. There's plants, there's animals, there's fungi, etc. So they have their own kingdom. There's more organisms, more different species in the fungal kingdom than animals and plants combined. So it's a large kingdom. It's very diverse. Anything involving fermentation comes from a fungus. So if you like beer, wine, bread, chocolate, etc., that's required, but that's only possible because of the fungus. And most people think of button mushrooms or psilocybin mushrooms or the emoji mushroom when they think about mushrooms or fungus, right? And that's really just the fruiting body of the organism. That's the apple on the tree. Okay, but the primary form that these organisms live in is in the mycelial form. You can think of it as an underground one cell wall root system. Okay, so it's a bunch of tubes underground that connects this network. And in those tubes, they send information bidirectionally, they send resources. So it's a series of industrial tubes, pumps, pulleys, sending information, sending resources. And it's connected to all the trees underground. There's not a single tree that we've found that doesn't have fungal allies infused into the roots. And those fungal allies are mining minerals in the ground and selling them to the trees. Meanwhile, the tree is creating fats and sugars through photosynthesis, and they're selling those back down to the mushrooms. And so if you go to a forest underground, there's a massive economy. And the latest research is showing that these organisms are actually looking at it as a market. There's instances of buying low, selling high. You hoard water and then sell it to the trees later. It's also trading across species lines. So I hesitate to call it a rosy avatar collaboration picture. It's more like a market where it's competitive but positive sum. And so that's what you can think of underground. And in this mycelial network, right, you can cut it in half, and now you have two networks. It doesn't harm the organism at all. And it's a very robust architecture. Our oldest multicellular organisms are actually mycelial networks, over 2 billion years old now. There's bacteria and microorganisms prior, but the first advanced life is in the fungal kingdom. And these organisms have survived all the great extinction events. There's been at least five on our planet. So think asteroid lands, kills all the dinosaurs. The age of the dinosaur is gone, the mammal rises afterwards, but in the interim, fungi inherit the earth. And they're masters of chemistry as well. So underground, connecting all these trees, it's a very, very active environment. If some sort of predator is attacking this mycelial network, the mycelial network sends information around and says, hey, we're getting attacked. And the little mushroom scientists create a new custom enzyme. Again, masters of chemistry. They create chemistry to then go deal with that predator on one side of the network. The network solves the problem. It now upgrades itself. And then that individual organism has a new weapon in its defense system for later. And so it's effectively learning and becoming more robust over time. Okay, let's look at Bitcoin network. You can cut this network in half. It doesn't matter. You're not harming any individual part. Every individual part is entirely replaceable. Okay, if there's a bug in the software in Bitcoin, information travels through the network. The engineers create a new software patch or enzyme. They ship that around the network. The network upgrades, the network learns, right? You're starting to see these parallels emerge. And remember, fungi are very robust. They survive all the extinction events. That's because this type of evolutionary strategy is very strong. It's hard to stop this thing, and we see that through geological timescales. And so, if Bitcoin mimics some of the best evolutionary strategies on our planet, I think we can take away here that as a new type of digital superorganism, you might say, that follows the same robust network intelligence archetype. To me, that gives extreme confidence that the structure, the architecture of this thing is hard to stop. Okay, if Bitcoin's hard to stop, I think the number goes way, way up, right? I think Satoshi properly engineered it to sort of be a mind virus for humans, meaning he perfected money in a way that he knew that humans would want it. There's 21 million. And if there's 21 million and you can't change it, you can't stop it, humans are going to want this thing. I think he's right about that. And if you can't stop it, then I think the number goes again way, way, way up.
What advice would you give to someone that's new to Bitcoin who wants to understand some of these deeper implications? Any resources, or like where would you start with someone that's maybe brand
Yeah.
new? And yeah,
On the biology side or just generally understanding Bitcoin?
maybe both, taking them one at a time.
Yeah. On the biology side, I'm super biased here, but I think you should just read the first 1,000 words of Mycelium of Money. Um, Part of that essay was me trying to fungi pill all the Bitcoiners, meaning teach everyone. I'm very passionate about fungi, and so I want to teach the Bitcoiners about this thing. And so by reading that first part of that essay, you're going to get Fungi 101, you're going to get Bitcoin principles explained through that analogy. And I think most people say I learn a lot about both in the process, which was my goal. If you want to learn about fungi in general, I think the best book there would be, oh wow, I'm blanking on the name. I'll have to get back to you on that one. Um, oh man, tip of my tongue. I can't remember. There's a book, it's in my Twitter thread, and I'll send it to you. You can add it here. Let's see. In Bitcoin in general, I think the bullish case for Bitcoin by BJ is probably the best starting point. And the reason is it gives you the economic case. And I think the economic case is the most important thing for beginners to grasp. I've seen a lot of people get lost in the software, the cryptography, the mining, the blah, blah, blah. And I think that's a really hard way to understand Bitcoin. If you look throughout the last 10 years, there's been many examples of very smart engineers who approach Bitcoin from an engineering lens and they say, huh, well, it seems pretty inefficient. Why are you replicating the database across thousands and thousands of computers? Why is that? That's so inefficient. And the answer is yes, it is extremely inefficient, but it's a trade-off here. We're giving up efficiency on the base layer in order to create redundancy in the ledger, meaning it's hard to stop this thing. And so I think, yeah, rather than getting caught in that, just go for the economic case. If humans are going to want this thing in the future, that's all you need to know to own it. And then after understanding the economic case, I would say follow your nose. If you're interested in the engineering side, go that route. If you're interested in mining, go that route. It's a very, very big world, and you can go as deep or shallow as you want in this thing. But first, get the economic case, then follow your nose.
On the energy and mining side of it, what do you think is most misunderstood, and what, why is the energy side of it so misunderstood as far as Bitcoin's energy consumption?
Yeah, good question. If you look throughout the last 5 years or so, you'll see a major influx of headlines in the mainstream media saying Bitcoin's boiling the oceans or some crazy claim like that. And you can track the history of these ideas, like a former Dutch central banker who will not be named wrote some very bad papers that are just totally wrong, and they get cited all the way up and down the government. There's a grad school class in Hawaii that published a 3-page like assignment that somehow made it into one of the journals that gets cited. So the whole thing is based on bad science. That's point one. Point two is that I think the average human, I would say probably up to 90% of individuals do not understand how energy works. They don't understand the principles. They don't understand the markets around it. And so, and to be fair, these are very complex topics, probably more complex than Bitcoin in many ways. And so, through that lens, there's just not a lot of people in the world to actually assess how Bitcoin does or does not interact with the grid. So, we have bad data, bad science, and we have an intellectual hurdle to get over before you can even properly evaluate this thing. We're 0 for 2 in Bitcoin. Then the next one is Bitcoin's entirely transparent, meaning we know exactly how much energy is being used. No other industry is like that. And so we get this large number being flaunted around, like as much energy as Finland, as much energy as Argentina, or whatever. And those are just flagrant stats designed to enrage individuals. And is the first question is that a lot or a little? Why would we care how much Denmark uses or Argentina? So then the next question is, okay, it uses a lot, but what do we get back in return for this thing? And I think that's where the rubber meets the road. If you see Bitcoin as a valuable tool for various reasons we can go after, then you're comparing the cost to the benefit. But if you're a I hate Bitcoin because reasons person, it doesn't matter how much it uses, you're going to hate it because it's using any amount of energy to be wasted. Never mind the fact that clothes dryers in the US consume more energy than Bitcoin. But anyways, we won't go there. The final one is, I think, the zeitgeist around energy use is coming from a neo-Malthusian-ish perspective, which is to say, humans are bad, we're using too much energy, we're going to destroy the planet, and if we don't dramatically change course, we're all going to die. And so from that point of view, any energy use is bad, and yeah, you kind of wrap all that up together and you have a pretty pessimistic worldview. And I take the complete opposite stance. We want more people and more energy used. If you care about the well-being of humans, it's pretty much a story of us learning how to harness more energy more efficiently and more broadly distributed. all human progress is downstream of cheap and reliable energy. And so I think it's important to take a step back and realize that that is the foundation of civilization. There's no wealthy nations that don't consume a ton of energy. And there's many countries that are very poor by Western standards, and they don't have the energy to produce the things they need, and the energy costs are really high, let alone. And so I would like to think of energy as a master commodity that's upstream of all human progress. And so if you want to make people's lives better, you want to give them low cost power all over the world. And so I think that's what we should be looking at. Now, how does Bitcoin fit in here? Again, this thing's complicated, but what Bitcoin does is it works synergistically with our energy production. So, a couple principles. One, energy is not globally fungible. So, if I'm in the middle of nowhere in Iceland and I produce a bunch of energy, I cannot sell that to you in New York without having some physical infrastructure to move the energy across. And batteries are not efficient, super expensive, way behind. And so what that means is there's areas where energy is cheap and there's areas where energy is expensive. And that's just naturally part of how this process unfolds. There's nothing we can do about it. And Bitcoin miners, the number one thing they care about is low cost of power and stability from the regime. And so Bitcoin miners, they're just little computers and they go seek out these low energy points all around the world. And it's low energy because there's no competition nearby. Usually it's isolated or stranded energy. And so there's some energy producer somewhere, they're producing a bunch and not a lot of demand. So they have excess energy that's literally wasted. Or they could sell it to a Bitcoin miner who comes on site and buys all that surplus energy, right? So you can kind of think of it as a sponge that sucks up all the energy mispricings all around the world. And so, yes, it consumes a lot in quotations, but it's rarely competitive with end users, aka you and me. And it's beneficial in many cases because it allows us to produce net new energy assets more cost effective. Meaning, if I'm going to go deploy a new hydro facility in the mountains somewhere, it might take 5 years to build the high voltage transmission lines to bring that to the population center. What do you do in that 5 years? You're just burning cash. And if you're burning cash, it's hard to get the capital needed to produce this investment. So the Bitcoin miners are essentially the first customer by all the new energy. And that reduces the risk and the capital requirements to fund the energy. So Bitcoin's helping fund new energy assets around the world. Again, that spreads prosperity. And the second thing is it buys up all the surplus energy on the grid as well. And grids are effectively trying to balance supply and demand at all times. So you have a bunch of buyers and a bunch of producers, and it's this market, and you're moving things around, and the operator is trying to do their best to balance that load. And the Bitcoin miners, they can just plug into the network and say, anytime there's excess power, we're buying it, which is actually beneficial to the grid. And anytime consumers need to heat their homes, the miners just turn off, right? So it's just a bolt on to any infrastructure and it makes things more efficient. And in the meantime, you're mining globally fungible digital hard money. It's a really beautiful thing. And I don't think Satoshi intended for any of this, by the way. I think all these positive externalities for the energy markets are a happy little accident that we walked into. And most Bitcoiners didn't observe it even 5 years ago. And I think the arc of Bitcoin's boiling the oceans has already peaked. And now all the mainstream media is starting to realize that the truth is on our side. It's net positive for the energy grid, and it's net positive for humans flourishing by producing net new energy as well.
Hey guys, today's episode is brought to you by Stampseed. If you're in cold storage, you know how important it is to protect your seed phrase. That's why I recommend you head over to stampseed.com and check it out for yourself. This seed phrase storage device is one solid piece of titanium. There are no loose pieces, and you can hammer your seed phrase in letter by letter. When you go to stampseed.com, use promo code TIM15 for a 15% discount across the website. That's TIM15. In a broad sense, how do you see Bitcoin transforming society in the next 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, good question. I think I like to approach this in two ways. I think there's two stages here for Bitcoin. There's the monetization event, which is what we're living through now, and then there's some sort of equilibrium. Okay, monetization event. Humans around the world are trying to figure out what this Bitcoin thing is. It's a new digital synthetic commodity money-ish. People think it might be a store value asset broadly held. People think it might be the base of a new currency system, or it is the new currency system. We don't know yet. And so what the monetization phase is defined by is extreme volatility, mostly to the upside, and a whole bunch of humans, again, trying to grapple with this thing. And the animal spirits push the price around, again, up and to the right on average. During this stage, how does Bitcoin change the world? I would say it identifies cracks in the system. It's kind of the escape valve for the system. And it also will make a bunch of people fabulously wealthy for identifying this trend early.
Mm.
And the later you identify this trend, the less upside there is. Of course, that's true, but also the less risk. And if we point 2024, end of 2024, beginning of 2025, we put that line in the sand, I would say largely de-risked as we see nation states start to dip their toes in. And I think we probably still have 100x left on the upside. 50 to 100x feels about right there, assuming we reach the equilibrium that I forecast. Okay, so in that early stage, shows the cracks, acts as a pressure release valve, which allows individuals to save themselves, meaning we have a capital preservation problem. Inflation's high. It's hard to beat that yield. Individuals have to become investors just to preserve the fruits of their labor. That's horrible for the economy. And with Bitcoin, you can just save some percentage of your income in Bitcoin. And if it does what we think it will do, you will preserve, if not grow, your purchasing power over time. So it literally saves individuals financially. It also saves corporations like Microstrategy and many others. It saves countries like El Salvador. And so it scales up and down. It's an opt-in system where people can preserve their purchasing power. And I think that causes a ripple effect to anyone near those individuals, right? As an individual, my purchasing power has gone up from holding Bitcoin. So my uncertainty about the future has also gone down. And if I'm less uncertain about the future, I can act a little bit differently in my present day, meaning I can think more long term. I can spend time on the things that matter. I can build a family, etc. And so it's a very, very strong thing for individuals. It's also a strong thing for corporations, nations, etc. And that brings us to the equilibrium point. So let's forecast out, I don't know, 10 to 100 years feels 80% confident. That's probably the range. At that point, we figured out what this Bitcoin thing is. I expect the price to be relatively stable at that point. Maybe over a 5-year period, it probably grows compound annual growth rate of roughly GDP globally. So I see it as a proxy for growth globally, probably gets embedded into the Bitcoin price. In that world, very little gains to be had. Investors will take risk elsewhere in equities and other. And in that world, I forecast a world where individuals have a lot more power symmetry with our states. Right now, we're at, let's say, 300 countries. In this equilibrium, I would expect closer to 3,000. And smaller states where the individuals are treated more like corporations and less like, or sorry, treated more like customers and less like tax cattle. And so essentially you defang the state by removing the money printer. And it doesn't mean that countries won't have a currency, but a large portion of these large industrial states we found ourselves in comes from the ability to produce a currency and direct the flows. And so I think if we take that out of the state and have it be more symmetrical, I think what we'll find is smaller nation states are more competitive,
Mhm.
not only from Bitcoin, but I also think as we move into a post-industrial world, into something more like an internet empowered world. You can read The Sovereign Individual for takes along this line. Um, let's see, that's one. I expect our energy consumption production to be way up. I don't even want to put a number on it, but so astronomically much higher than right now, it will be laughable. And I think that'll be a good thing. I really hope in this future world we don't have a crashing global population, but that seems to be the trend right now. Hopefully we can turn it around with everyone feeling a little more wealthy with their Bitcoin. Maybe they'll start reproducing, which we desperately need.
You've talked about Bitcoin as a tool for human coordination. How does it compare to traditional systems of governance or cooperation?
Yeah, I think the best way to look at this is through like a monetary theory lens. And so, what is money? Money is this abstract accounting system for who provided value. So, I shoveled your driveway, Tim, and I did you a little favor, and you can pay me $20, or maybe you just have a little mental ledger in your head that's saying Brandon did me a favor, right? In either case, that's sort of serving the purpose of money. It's just accounting for who adds value. And if I add a bunch of value to the world, I get money in return through my employer or through some other means. And those money tokens are just essentially I can buy someone else's time later or their energy later. And so it's this abstraction layer of who adds value. And that's very useful in a society because we can then trade with people we don't know, we don't trust, and it creates an economy that's is as big as the money, as far as the money goes, is how big the economy can be. And so now what you have is anyone anywhere on the world can contribute to society, again, get paid in these money tokens for doing so. And the more parties we have trading and specializing their labor and getting better and iterating on their labor, the more wealth we create as a society. So money is just a coordination mechanism for trading, and it allows us to scale up our society. Nick Szabo has a term called social scalability. It's kind of what I'm backing into here, where if you're a hunter-gatherer society, let's say of 100, 150 people, you don't really need a money because you can sort of mentally keep track of favors in a tribe.
Mm.
But if you want to grow into an agricultural society and trade with the neighboring community, let's say, and that community uses beads and you use shells or whatever for your money, that might cause some friction. Or if you don't have any money tokens, how do you trade three chickens for a goat? Right? So you have the double coincidence of wants and your money. So then money allows us to scale society up and be larger and larger and coordinate more. Okay, examples of social scalability might be religion or money or property rights or things like that. And I think money is just one of the most powerful social scalability tools. And we've gone from that 150 kin group all the way up to 8 billion people who don't trust each other, but will trade Bitcoin online or exchange goods and services for it. And so what I see is Bitcoin essentially takes all previous monies, and it's probably an order of magnitude better on social scalability for the planet. Instead of having 100 currencies siloed in each country, we can have a one internet native currency. So anyone around the world can trade together. This is less important for those of us in the West. We have access to capital markets and banking and Visa and stable currency relatively. But if you're in a developing country, this is a huge deal. You don't have to buy the local currency that your government's blowing up. You can save in Bitcoin. And that could mean the difference between launching a business or starving to death in your country. And so these are really, really important things. So at the individual level, anyone can participate. Good for the individual. And at the society level, the ability to bring human capital online globally has positive downstream effects for all of civilization, right? Imagine if there's an Elon Musk type character who lives in Zimbabwe right now and can't save long enough to start his incredible business idea because the currency keeps getting blown out. All it takes is one person in that next Elon Musk to be unshackled in this way, and then they all of a sudden bring their idea to market, and we all benefit from that tremendously. And so bringing new capital online is a big part of that. If you look at the fiat, and then I'll do one more point on moral hazard to compare it with fiat. So in fiat money, if there's a problem in the economy, the central planners who oversee the currency and the corresponding banks and that whole network, they can say, hey, let's intervene in the game. Let's bail out the banks. They're really important and we don't want to cause any problems. Okay. In the moment, that might be the right decision. I don't know. It's not my choice. It's hard to compare that. But what it does is it creates an incentive mechanism for central planners to over plan, over uh, mess with the economy. And every time you do that, it creates tremendous distortions in the market. So the people are buying the wrong things at the wrong time. And what that means over time is we're essentially just kicking the can down the road and we're just suppressing volatility, which means we're just building up risk and risk and risk in the system. So we're essentially hollowing out the system. It's a house of cards. And so the smallest little breeze will take the whole thing down in the future. And so if we continue down that pattern over and over again, we create these massive volatility boom bust cycles that just totally resets things. And in those environments, it causes tremendous damage to individuals, society. It takes us decades to recover at certain points. And so that's the fiat system. Extremely high magnitude peaks and troughs. In a Bitcoin system, there's no bailouts. There's no central planners. You can't disproportionately give the bankers some money here and take it from the taxpayers over there. And so, in that type of system, risk is laid bare. The market responds immediately. It's always priced in. You can't suppress volatility, which on one hand makes Bitcoin's price very volatile. Absolutely true. But in the trade-off you get is systemic stability. Okay, short-term instability on the price, long-term systemic stability. That's what Bitcoin gives. Fiat's the opposite. You get short-term price stability, but you also have to accept massive instability at the systemic level. And so I think if we transition closer to a Bitcoin system, and it's not a either or, I forecast both being around for a long time, to be clear, but leaning more towards a Bitcoin system, I expect the magnitude of the peaks and troughs in our cycles to go down as we price things in real time rather than suppressing the volatility. And that means a slightly more stable society. And a more stable society allows us to grow taller and more robust things for our civilization over time. So massive, massive win for long-term thinking in humanity.
That's interesting. You talking about in the traditional system suppressing the volatility. How do you think of that? I mean, we see Bitcoin now, there's some weekends where the price really doesn't move at all. And there's other weekends where it's very volatile. And at least the explanation that speaks the most to me is when it's laid out that it's the only thing you can buy or sell on the weekends. So of course it's volatile. Any thoughts on that? And how do you think about the volatility of Bitcoin as it continues to evolve? There's this camp of people in the diminishing returns. That's what they think is going to happen. There's other analysts that think the volatility is actually going to increase as the price increases. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, great question. So, yeah, what's up with Bitcoin on the weekends? Yeah, it's 24/7, 365 global asset. It also has, I view it as like the early alert system. If you remember March 2020, COVID crash, Bitcoin went down first. It went down violently. I remember smash buying with every dollar I could get my hands on that day. Sorry, wife. We have no money in any of our accounts until further notice. We're buying corn on a discount. Uh, Anyways, anecdote aside, yeah, I think it acts as the early alert system all over the place. And the fact that it's 24/7, 365 globally liquid means that if an investor smells pain in the market elsewhere, they may sell Bitcoin first to cover what they might need. So it's, yeah, cover your ass and also early alert system on the 24/7. In terms of diminishing returns, I think the right way to think about this is, do we anticipate where are we on the S curve, or is there going to be an S curve for adoption? And the S curve starts out really gradual, then it gets steep, and then it gets gradual again. That's the typical curve there. And if I had to pick, I think that the S curve is going to be Bitcoin's fate. Like all technological innovation, all paradigm shifts, I think they all follow this S curve. And so you can think about, even though Bitcoin's been very aggressive right now, the question to ask yourself is, have we already gone through the steep part of the S curve or not? And I think the best argument is the answer is no, we have not gone through the steep part yet, which would
Mhm.
mean I'll say in the next 10 years, we hit the steep part of the S curve. I
Whew.
think that if I had to
That's
guess,
interesting.
it's probably in the next 2 years, maybe 5 years. And the reason why I say that is because Bitcoin's super, super weird. And the context around Bitcoin, meaning individuals evaluating what to buy, has changed a lot since Bitcoin's been around. I would say Bitcoin's barely changed, but now the market is starting to rapidly realize that we need this thing. Again, capital preservation problem. If you want to store the fruits of your labor, you need to own some Bitcoin. This is true for pretty much any asset allocator in the world. And I think that, so number one, it's needed. Number two, it's underowned dramatically. Most people don't know they need it yet. And so I think those two things combined with the fact that the US government is giving it a stamp of approval will create a flood of individuals evaluating if they should own it and if so, when and how much. And I think that that's going to happen in a big way in the next year or two. And if that does happen, and we don't have some like global meltdown or major recession or World War III, or maybe we'll have all those things. Um, Hard to evaluate with those in mind, but without those in mind, I think that the largest part of the S curve is coming up. Dramatically underowned, we all need it, and it's still only 2 trillion. Um, we 10x and we're at gold's market cap. Does that feel like the end? I don't think so.
Maybe
Yeah, my
just the
guess
beginning.
is I think just the beginning.
And that's so interesting because when you look at a chart, I mean, from $0 to $100,000 is a lot of movement, but I guess that was largely retail driven. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, for sure.
And so when you go from 100,000 to a million or 100,000 to 10 million, and you have corporates or you have retail nations and then corporates, which is super weird to say out loud because you'd think it'd go retail, corporates, nations. Um, yeah, and
Yeah.
if you're on that steep part of the S curve, that could be a violent move over some shorter period of time. At least that's, I think, what you're laying out. Is that, am I
Yeah,
hitting it?
exactly right. I had a tweet recently. It was tongue in cheek. I don't actually mean this exactly, but I said 0 to 100 took 15 years, and I think 100K to 1 million will take about 15 months. And so I like the symmetry. Don't hold me to the exact quote, but it's what you're saying. The first 100K is hard. It's retail driven. High social cost to acquire Bitcoin under 100K up until this point. The US government starts buying or whatever other series of dominoes, it's going to be hard not to own it. And I think they call it like a preference cascade or something like that. There's some term. It's really just the paradigm flips from don't own it to own it. And humans are social creatures, we're herd animals. And so once we cross the chasm or flip the switch or whatever, we have all these idioms for this. Once that does occur, I think that will dramatically, dramatically shoot up. And primarily it's because social acceptance, but your point around different types of buyers, that's also crucial. We couldn't go to 100 trillion market cap on retail buyers alone. And so if this also ties into an interesting point where Bitcoiners, let's say old guard Bitcoiners, who I might say are narrow-minded here, maybe libertarian-ish, they're saying, hey, we want to destroy fiat. Fiat's bad. The government's bad. We want to take their power away. Don't let them buy Bitcoin. Why are we cheering this on? And I think that that position is just wrong. I think the reality is if we're right about Bitcoin as a monetary asset, then everyone's going to want to own it. And that includes our governments, that includes our corporations. Okay, that's step one. So this is what winning looks like. That's the first point. The second point is that, well, why would we want to empower governments, banks, central banks, et cetera? And the answer is, well, we don't really want to give them more power, but they're going to buy this thing. So we have to accept that in this world, they're going to own Bitcoin. And then you have to ask yourself, can they co-opt Bitcoin? Does Bitcoin co-opt them? Like, what are the implications of our largest power sources buying Bitcoin? And I think the first and most important thing here is that just because you own the asset doesn't mean you get to control the network. And so we're having a globally, it's an arms race. It's a monetary arms race to buy this thing. And so we're seeing people all around the world own it. Competitive nations will own it. And what we want to see for the health of the network is broadly distributed Bitcoin. So you don't want the US to own it all. You don't want China to own it all. You want competitors to each have a piece. And so that the power is spread out. And the next thing is, does this make governments more powerful? And so it doesn't kill Bitcoin, I don't think. And does it make governments more powerful? In a way, yes, but it essentially removes their power of the money printer. So I'm okay with solvent governments who base a currency with Bitcoin. I don't have a problem with that. I'd rather have that than have their fiat currency print to oblivion and they're super desperate and they raise property taxes 50% and confiscate everything you have because they're desperate. That's a way worse outcome. So I'd rather inject some stability into the government while simultaneously it acts like a Trojan horse because the more successful Bitcoin is, the less successful their fiat machine is. And so I think it's best viewed as a Trojan horse into the fiat world or a poison pill. They need to take it, but by taking it, ultimately it kicks off a process to defang them in the future. Little tangent there, but I see too much hate on this one on Twitter and had to share that.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot more that I think both of us want to get to, but so that just means we'll have to do this again, get our schedules together. Where can people reach out to you, and throw it over to you for any closing thoughts that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm most active on Twitter, B Quittem. So Brandon, last name Quittem, B Quittem on Twitter. All my essays are at brandonquittem.com. My DMs are open. Come say hello. If you want to get started buying Bitcoin in the US, you can go to swan.com/quittem. You can get $10 free for signing up. We serve retail, we serve high net worth, we have IRA products, we have a multi-sig custody product, lots of other things cooking over there. Credit card coming out in 2025. You can sign up for the early waitlist at swan.com now. Yeah, that's all that's on my mind, and appreciate the time together, Tim, and look forward to the next one.
Awesome. Thank you so much.